Voltron will be back after these messages. And now, back to Voltron, Defender of the Universe.
Welcome, Voltron fans. This is Marc Morell, your host for Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast for the first time in 2023. We have a special guest today, but I have to bring on my co-host, Greg Tyler. Welcome, Greg.
Hello, Marc Morell. Hello, Voltron fans across the universe. We're back. We have a special guest. I, for one, have been wanting to talk with this gentleman for at least 3 or 4 years. So it's wonderful that we finally reached out to him, and he was gracious enough to respond. And he's on with us today. And who do we have, Marc?
Okay, so he's a freelance comic book artist and industrial designer. He's worked for Marvel, Skybound Entertainment, IDW, DDP, and Image Comics. And of course, he was one of the artists on the DDP Voltron Defender of the Universe with Dan Jolly back in 2004. So welcome, EJ Sue.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you on. We've admired your work both with Voltron and outside of Voltron for quite some time. So it's wonderful to have you on.
Yeah, and I have to start this off by apologizing, EJ, because we have had actual requests since 2014 to have you on, and this is the first time I've been able to get it all together. So I apologize because we're coming up into our 10th year of the podcast, and we've been having people ask about you since the beginning.
Wow.
I was not aware of that, but now that I do, that I am, hey, it's even more amazing to have you here. So
I apologize to all the fans of Let's Voltron for not getting EJ on earlier. So thank you for coming with us, EJ.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
So obviously we want to talk about the work that you did with Voltron, but we also know that there's a ton of other stuff that you've done. And anybody who likes anything that's related to Voltron, you've probably drawn it at some point in your life, right?
Probably.
So you've worked with Transformers, you've worked with Ultraman, X-Men, Venom, G.I. Joe versus Transformers, just Astro Boy. Is there anything you haven't touched, really, that you would still like to touch?
Well, there are a lot of stuff that I would love to touch. Incredible Hulk, for one, Batman, Superman, all these classic characters. I would love to get a hands on it. Also, recently, we have seen some of the Kamen Rider comics coming out from, I think was, I can't remember what publisher, but that was also one of the property that I grew up loving. So it would be nice to be able to one day do something for it.
Okay, cool.
So you mentioned growing up, and can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you've come from, and how you got into illustration and art and all that?
I was born in Taiwan, and since we're very close to Japan, and everything comics, animation all came from Japan, so I was exposed to Japanese animation comics ever since I could read. I remember when I was little, one of my dad's friend took me to a comic book store and bought me a bunch of Japanese comic. It was like Ultraman, Kamen Rider, and bunch of other stuff that I can't remember right now. But Ultraman and Kamen Rider are two of the things that stuck with me throughout the year. So, ever since I can remember, this is something I want to do. Just draw comic for a living. And I have tons of other interests too, but I know eventually I want to come back to comic no matter what. And basically I'm living my dream right now.
Well, that's wonderful. Not many people can say that, so that's a great thing to hear. I guess one of the things that you're very well known for is Transformers, and having worked on Transformers both for comic book publishers and also doing some artwork for Hasbro itself. Can you talk about not only Transformers specifically, but your interest in giant robots and bringing those to the page?
Well, I think the first giant robot that I can remember was Mazinger Z.
Yeah.
That's one thing I watched religiously. And back then we had Mazinger Z. I mean, they have like tons of different series of Mazinger Z,
Mm-hmm.
and I watched that religiously. And then I got into Voltron a little bit back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, also, I I also got into Gundam.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when I saw Gundam, back in the day, robots are like it's a little fantastical. It you know as a kid you love it, but when you as you grow out, you realize some of the joint doesn't work. They don't
Mm-hmm.
really engineer correctly.
Right.
But
Right.
when Gundam came out, it was like put a whole new spin on robots, and mechanically they work like they look like they work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things that fascinates me, that how do you get the robot to work? And when I saw Gundam, I sometimes just take piece of paper and try to fashion a robot out of the papers, making joint works and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents don't buy me a lot of toys. And those Japanese toys are very, very expensive back in the day. So I
Mm-hmm.
Oh
don't
yeah.
get so so basically I'm building my own toys out of paper, out of try to do the best I can, and plus my imagination. So, that's where my fascination with robot came in.
But you really got a good skill set when it comes to 3D modeling, don't you?
Yeah, I like to do that. It's kind of taking what I did as a kid. I cut up paper and making joints and all that kind of stuff with paper. Instead
Mm-hmm.
of doing that, I'm doing it on a computer, and it's much easier. I it's much cleaner. It's not messy. You don't deal with glues and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So when you say 3D modeling using the computer, do you use 3D modeling tools to assist you in your artwork or
Uh, Not as much before, because in a way the rendering engine wasn't as as good as what it is right now. Nowadays, you can
Right.
build a model and kind of translate into line art. And but when you do that, even today, when you do that, those line are a little. It's not. It's it doesn't feel as alive as drawn by hand.
that's a
So
fair point.
yeah, so basically, even though I could do that, but I would still prefer do it by hand.
Hmm.
I have experiment with it, but those lines just doesn't come out the way I wanted it.
Sure.
All the human error, it adds a lot of character to a drawing.
I agree. And I must say as we were reviewing going back and looking at your Voltron work from 2004 and it's just, I mean, the hand drawn, the organic nature of it gives it a lifelike quality that you would not get from a straight 3D render. So
Right.
I definitely agree with you that hand drawn has a unique quality, and of course it's unique to every artist. So there's
Right.
that as well.
Correct.
There have been things that you've drawn where it's a giant robot, and maybe in the foreground or beside the giant robot, you have regular sized people. How do you determine the perspective from an artist's rendering of a giant robot, real people, and how you do the size and scope and all that kind of stuff? How do you figure it out?
That's an interesting question. Um, it's just that when you're drawing robot is such a huge size compared to human.
Mhm.
A lot of time I would look at a drawing and thinking, okay, does this human fit into that robot where the pilot is gonna supposed to be fit inside?
Yeah.
Um, that kind of come into factor into how I would proportion the human, and in order to look like to establish the perspective. Um, to me, perspective is very important to establish the shot, because once you have the perspective correctly established, you you kind of put the reader into that environment as well. So you'll see, um, you get that foreground and background, and you get that feel that you're actually right there with the character and the robot. Um and to answer your question, I'm not really sure. It's kind of just kind of second nature to me at this point.
Mhm.
I'm not sure what else I did differently. So
Yeah.
it's hard to answer that question for me.
Greg and I
I,
like to try to see if we can get our figures from Voltron to fit into the robots themselves. And over the years, we haven't really had that opportunity very often. Uh,
yeah, they haven't made too many of the Voltron toys with actual pilots, that's for sure.
yeah, they've made them with little pilots like this size,
Yeah.
about the size of your nose, but not the full, like, what is it, 4 3/4 inch or whatever figures.
Yeah, yeah. And frankly, with Voltron in particular, you don't see people juxtaposed with the lions or the robots very often. And of course, a lot of that is because the robots are fighting other giant things rather than just walking down the street with a normal person. The opportunity isn't really there very much. But in the comics that you worked on, I think you juxtapose those far more often than the actual anime did. Which gives that extra sense of perspective. When you just see the robot fighting a row beast, it's hard to know exactly how big it is because
Right.
they're out in the wilderness with trees and hills. But unless you have a real an object, a very well-known everyday object like a car or a human being, it's difficult to get that sense of scale sometimes.
Hmm.
But I think you sold that concept of scale very well.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad people feel that way. Um, I guess a lot of it is has to do with the camera angle, like how you fit, where you place your camera in order to have the human and the robot in the shot, and and to look correctly. You
Mhm.
know,
That makes sense. So you say that you had told us that you got interested in illustration from when you were a child, making paper models of some of your favorite robots, and and then you eventually moved into comics. And how did you make that? How did you become involved in the comics industry?
Back in early 2000s, um, message board were very popular.
Mm-hmm.
So, I back back then I jump on message board, and I a lot of people that are have the same interests as I do. People posting their artwork, and eventually I woke up the courage to do that myself. And I met a lot of people that eventually moved into doing comics as well. Um, like Robert Kerman, I met him over message board.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we get to work on some project together. Uh, that's kind of how I get started. Is that a few friend of mine back in the day with message board group, and we kind of put out this self-funded comic. Um, uh, we put it out, and Robert Kerman helped us publish it. Um, we use that as a sample package to send out to publishers,
Mm-hmm.
and pretty soon some of people are start you know a lot of publishers read the comics, and they kind of like what they see and start contacting people that work on the comics, and I was one of them. So that's where I got started.
Was
And
was that Tech Jacket?
well, since well that wasn't well the message board didn't directly lead to Tech Jacket,
Mm-hmm.
but um, since I met uh, I met Robert Kerman through message board.
Mm-hmm.
We were pitching for Transformer comic back in the day
Okay.
before Dreamwave got the license.
Ah.
Okay.
So he wrote some plots and story for to submit into, and I did some artwork to submit into Hasbro for license approval. But eventually the license went to Dreamwave, and Robert told me that, oh hey, we have this story already. Um, he's he's gonna rework some of the storyline into a new comic, which eventually turned into Tech Jacket.
Ah.
Okay.
Okay. So Tech Jacket has also been featured in the Invincible comics,
Right.
and
Um,
I'll bet it's one of your hopes that that character will eventually show up in the animated version of Invincible too, right?
yeah, yeah. That would also that's one of my wish. I
That would be cool. We are
Yeah, that
No
would be.
doubt.
I
we
mean,
are
now a
anxious.
lot of people can say that your creation is being made into animation.
Right, exactly. So all of your heroes, you like Astro Boy and Mazinger Z and all that kind of stuff came from some of your favorite manga artists, right?
Right, yeah. Uh, they're my big influence, as I was saying earlier, that I grew up reading these comics, and I read everything that Osamu Tezuka drew.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he was the king of Japanese comics,
Right.
basically. So, I love everything that he does, and he was a huge influence on me. I mean, I don't draw like him, but
Right.
he definitely one of the biggest influence in my life.
I was just wanted to touch on something quickly. When you started with Devil's Due, I read that you had before working on Voltron, you had worked for a time on Micronauts. Is that right?
Who?
Micronauts?
Oh yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So was that your introduction to Devil's Due?
Um, it was so long ago. I'm not so sure, but
Okay.
I think that was yeah, I think that was my first project with Devil's Due.
Okay.
And Michael now was very exciting for me because I love the Japanese version, the Michael Man.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Man was Michael Man toys was eventually some of the Michael Man toy line eventually turned into Transformers. So
Right.
a lot of what I love is kind of interconnected in some way. It's and it's very exciting for me as a creator that grew up with these kind of stuff. And I get to work on Michael Man, work on Transformer, work on Voltron,
Mhm.
and Godzilla, Ultraman, hopefully more in the future.
So I kind of wondered when you were making the DDP comics for Voltron, did you ever think of designing Pidge to be a little bit like Mega Man?
Hmm, I'm not sure that ever crossed my mind.
Okay, I just wondered.
Was it something remind you of Mega Man?
Volume 2, Issue 2 from the DDP Voltron Defender of the Universe Paradise Lost.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I'm going to show a little bit of my screen here. All right, so you can see in the middle of the screen there that there's the Pidge design with the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering if there was any influence whatsoever from Mega Man at all in that.
Ah, okay, now you mention it. I see what you're saying, but I think the uniform was designed by someone else.
Ah,
Okay.
okay.
I
That
Gotcha.
think
was
I
one of
worked
my
on.
questions for you was who redesigned these uniforms for the comics?
Well, there were several artists on that. There was Helinski, um, Kroll.
Wasn't I work on volume 2? Was I on volume 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it turns out that the first set of comics um that Devil's Due created were actually distributed by Image. So there was a short series that came out from Image, and then Devil's Due published and distributed its own comics, and those are the ones that you had worked on.
Right,
Right.
right.
Right. So that's the first image I wanted to show, and that was when all the pilots got their uniforms for the first time, and it was the reason that they said that they were different colors, not necessarily everybody was the same color, was because they got them from a bombed out armory. So they were just scavenging the uniforms
Mm-hmm.
from a bombed out armory. Okay. So in this one issue, we get to see all the Voltron pilots. We get to see all the Voltron Lions right in this picture right here. Then we also get to see the space mice.
The Devil's Due Publishing iteration of Voltron was the first to suggest that the space mice are mechanical, robotic, rather than the organic mice from the anime. Do you recall whether that was imposed by the story and you drew to the story, or is this something that you or one of the other artists might have created that influenced the story?
Um, if I remember correctly, it was dictated in the script.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So Dan
And
Jolly was one of the first ones to introduce that the space mice could be mechanical.
right.
Yeah. And speaking of mechanical, in the previous image that you shared, Mark, one thing I noticed about the Voltron lions is that although they were very evocative of the lions from the original anime, the legs in particular had a much more realistic mechanical structure to them. They didn't,
Okay.
there's always a bit of magic in the anime that shows how the legs are moving and all that, but they don't, there's a lot of I guess you could say artist magic or animation magic behind the motion and the articulation of the lion legs in the anime. Was that something that you introduced or influenced, EJ, as you drew those lions for the comic?
Oh yeah. Well, before I start working on this comic, I did a few design sketches on how those robotic leg would retract and fit into each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I have an image online of my design sketch too. Uh,
Okay.
it's it's one of those things that I'm very concerned about is that it needs to look realistic in a realistic environment. Um, to me, to me, they need to look like they actually function.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's one of those things that I'm very particularly about is that mechanic needs to work rather than rely on some magic of animation or magic of artwork to make something work. Uh, it's one of those things that when I get a project like this, it's like me in the candy store. You know, I look at the old animation. I would I would say, oh, okay, that doesn't work. How do I make it work? And
Okay.
that's one of the things I want to bring into a project is that things need to work correctly.
Well, you certainly
Cool.
introduced in this comic a sense of realism. I mean, you can see I'm looking there like at the rear legs of the blue and red lions. There's a real sense that those joints can actually work as opposed to, again, I go back to the anime. As much as we love the anime, those joints didn't do anything. I mean, they were sort of vague shapes that really wouldn't interact with one another very well in the real world.
Yep. You see that one?
Yeah.
Do you remember what that is?
Yeah. That was supposed to be the third Voltron.
Right. All right. So this was Albagos. So all within one issue, we had all three Voltrons because we had the Lion Force Voltron Lions. We had Albagos here, and you can see they say, "Ugh, it looks like some kind of Voltron knockoff." Guess that version didn't take, huh? Guess not.
I guess not.
But you got to include it in this issue, which was awesome.
It
Yeah, go
was
ahead.
written into the script. It was meant to be like a Easter egg for the people who's in the know.
Right.
So on that point, because when you're featuring three Voltron robots, the five lions, the 15 vehicles that form the vehicle-based robot, Die Rugger, and then this one, it's only seen here, it's not seen separated. That's a lot of mechanical designs just in the Voltron robots and their components. Um, how much how much did you have to, you talked about how you worked to make the lion legs and joints seem as if they could actually function. Did you find that you had to tweak the designs of the robots themselves and perhaps even the vehicles that form the Die Rugger robot? Did you find that you had to tweak those designs a little more to add to their realism?
Well, I try to do as much as I can. Like for this one shot, there's not much going on. It's basically the old design. I didn't do a whole lot to it. But the vehicle Voltron, I try to add a little bit of mechanical into it, even though it's not as extensive as the original Voltron, the Lion robot. Uh, uh, but I do try to make the joints where they join together to look a little more realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't, I mean, I wasn't allowed to redesign the whole thing, but otherwise I would
have. So this is all the 15 vehicles from Vehicle Voltron, all in one shot.
Yep.
So when you have a drawing like this, I mean, it's one thing to have one lion or one vehicle, but when you're drawing 15 of them in perspective in one shot with a background, how much more complex is this from a penciling perspective and a layout perspective than a more typical panel might be?
It takes a lot more time, but it's not as complex as you may think.
Okay.
It's all one single perspective. You know, they're not the vehicles, they are not all facing different direction, and that would create a lot of problem. But right now they're all lined up and they're all following the same exact perspective. So, you know, laying them out is not that much trouble. It's just the time it takes to, you know, draw all the single details. Mechanical takes a lot more time than drawing organic human or, you know, raw beast uh or monsters.
Right, like kaiju,
So,
right?
right. Yeah. So it just takes more time, but it's not too complicated.
Okay.
Okay.
That just, as a fan of the vehicle based Voltron, I love seeing imagery like this. So to me,
Yes.
this is like gold.
This
Thank you.
having all of these in one issue is like amazing that you're the artist that got to do all this, because there isn't many comic issues of any Voltron that have all of this in one issue. So I just want to say congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you.
Because not only do we have all these vehicles, we
All
also have all the pilots all in one shot.
Since the Lion Force characters had been featured, potentially designed, like their uniform redesigns might have been by another artist. For example, for the Image, the comics published or distributed by Image. Did you directly design these? Do the redesigns on these? Because these have a very different. I mean, there's a similar motif here to the Lion pilot uniforms, but they're clearly distinct also. So, do you recall whether you designed these outfits? Because this was the first appearance of these of all of these characters.
You know, I don't remember. I wish I can answer you, but I don't remember.
Okay. And you know, thinking back to 2004, um, the internet was certainly around at that point, but a lot of the references would not have been as readily available then, presumably, as they are today. So when you are drawing 15 of these characters, did World Events Productions provide any reference images for these characters, or were you pretty much left on your own to find whatever you could?
I think I got a file of these characters,
Okay.
but I don't remember for sure. But I did have reference somewhere. Um, I mean, I do look it up myself, but I think I got some sort of reference from War Event Production.
Okay. I mean, you certainly caught the essence of each of the 15 pilots. It still impresses me to see this many people in one shot.
Right.
And if you know the anime or the Voltron adaptation, you can figure out who's who. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Oh, thank you.
this is great. So having Albagos, Dirugger, and Go Lion all in one issue, it was this issue right here. Okay. So this was the second issue of the volume 2 Paradise Lost from Voltron Defender of the Universe back in 2004 from DDP. And thank you, EJ Sue, for bringing that to us. We have at the end of that issue, by the way, I wanted to point out that they have some what they called the Planet Doom Postal Service.
Okay.
It
I'd
was
forgotten that.
it was basically letters to the editor kind of thing. And one of our friends, Danny DeWald, had actually gotten hers published.
That's fun.
Yeah. And she made a very nice, she said a very nice thing about EJ in here. So I just want to read this aloud. Is that all right?
Okay.
Okay. So first she talks about Dan Jolly and then she goes into EJ. So I'll start with the Dan part. Dan did a remarkable job in pulling me into this world, into his vision, and making me want to know what he is doing to make Voltron recapture that passion, the fascination I was lured to when I first watched the TV series. He's done a remarkable job on the first miniseries, and I must say that with issue number 1 of the second miniseries, he has done something that has made this fan nearly cry. He's outdone himself in taking his vision and making sure that we are along for the roller coaster ride. E.J. Sue's introduction to the series is a godsend. I'm new to his style, but I'm in awe of his talent. It's good of Devil's Due to bring on the many talents so far to a comic book series that was 20 years in the making. So that's from Danny, and she said, keep up the good work, guys. You've definitely turned me from being critical of the comic to a huge fan.
Wow.
So, and she's been a fan ever since, of course.
Wow.
She's been a fan for many years.
So that was a 19-year-old fan letter to you. And many people still regard these comics very highly. Much has been said in many positive things have been said about, in particular, the Netflix Voltron Legendary Defender show, for rebooting the Voltron concept and modernizing it a little bit. And I would say that to many of the original generation fans of Voltron, this comic did the same thing, the same kind of thing, and it holds a very special place in many Voltron fans' hearts. So,
yeah. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So one thing that you are probably much more widely known for in the giant robot vein is Transformers, and you had mentioned that you had worked through message boards with folks such as Robert Kirkman to become to do some work for Transformers, but ultimately you did wind up getting involved in that. How did that happen?
DDP did ended up doing a Transformer versus GI Joe comic,
Yeah.
and I think I was working on volume 2 as well. And I don't know if that has anything to do with directly lead me into doing Transformer for IDW.
Mm-hmm.
But during all this time, I've been working with Hasbro uh, on their like character art, and there was like a it's called Transformer Genesis, like some kind of Transformer Encyclopedia.
Mm.
I did some work in that. Um, it's pretty surprising to me that I didn't think I was known in the Transformer world because Dreamwave was so big at the time. They were so popular, and it took me by surprise that the IDW would contact me, someone who's not known in Transformers, to do their launching title. So, when I get that email from IDW, I'm like, I'm not asking any question. Where you got my information? I'm not asking any question. I just say yes. I'm gonna do it. I love to do it. I it's an opportunity of my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even pass up on to do a Transformer comics. Um, I've been loving it ever since. It's one of my bucket lists.
Mm-hmm.
Is to work on my childhood, uh, the property that I grew up watching and grew up loving, and it's just, there's no word that I can express how much I I'm glad that I get to work on these properties.
Right.
Now, Transformers, there have been so many iterations of Transformers over the years and so many characters in each iteration. If someone were to ask you, as I'm about to do you have any favorite characters, whether it's from a pure character perspective or from a visual design perspective that you would consider favorites?
Transformers.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there are many. Uh, the one character that I think I want to call favorite is probably Grimlock.
Grimlock.
I
Thought you
like
might
it.
say that.
Because basically, I love dinosaurs. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
dinosaur and robot. What can go wrong, right?
Yeah,
That's true. It's the
Jurassic
best of
Park is
both
one of your
worlds.
favorite movies too, right?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, I love that movie. Oh,
Oh yeah, I watch it many times.
yeah, it still holds up so well.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Well, Grimlock is definitely a great one, and yeah, what a
Yeah.
great combination, robot and dinosaur. Do you
yeah.
have a favorite? I didn't ask you that question about Voltron. Do you have a favorite Voltron character or Voltron robot?
I would say the Green Lion
Okay.
because he's the um. What would you describe him? He's the youngest in the family, and
Mm-hmm.
he's in a way he's the underdog.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's
I,
true.
yeah, I love to rule for the underdog.
So
Okay.
Pidge.
Yeah, and I love green.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
All
a good
right.
color.
One of my favorite is his version of Merla in the comics.
Oh yeah.
I, I,
Merla in the comics is certainly much more let's just say less conservatively dressed than Merla in the Voltron television show.
so here's Merla. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you had been doing Transformers for a while, and then you actually had a book of your own called Mecha Force that you came out with in 2008. What was the secondary title on that, Greg, again?
Mechaforce draw futuristic robots that fly, battle, and brawl. So how did that book come about?
Yeah, how did you get a chance to write a book?
when I start working on Transformers, people start noticing that I draw robots,
Mm-hmm.
and just out of the blue, I think it was Penguin Random House. Was it?
Was it Penguin?
I see the publisher is listed as F&W Media
Oh, it's
Incorporated, but
Impact. It's Impact
Impact.
Books. Impact
Okay.
Books.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I think they're a subsidiary of another publisher.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know the details, but
Yeah.
it's just out of the blue. An editor emailed me, see if I want to write a book, and they asked me if if I want to pair up with another writer to write a book, and they also have idea of what they want. Like mostly they want like a like typical how to draw books. They will show like different stages of how to draw a robot. But to me, it doesn't actually teach you how to draw robots. The important thing about robots is you have to know perspective. And
Right.
and to me, the internal of the robot is much more important than the exterior of the robots. So I suggest to them that we need to start from, showing the readers how to set up the mechanic in a simplistic kind of way. Um, in the first chapter and show people how to draw things in perspective, just quick and easy way of how to deal with perspective. I mean, robot basically they're boxes on top of boxes. They
Mm-hmm.
have boxes basically stacked on each other. And I want to try to show the reader that's how a robot is constructed. And each part of them is a box. You can't get away from perspective. So in the first chapter, we start showing the basic of how to construct robots. Like how you translate a human muscle into a robotic parts, and how to draw cubes in perspective, how to draw cylinder in perspective, basic stuff like that. And then we get into the typical three stages, like uh, construct construction drawing and uh, cleanup drawing and then finish drawing. And
Mm-hmm.
they go with that idea, and that's how it came about. I
Okay.
think it, I think initially they want me to do transforming robots. They were afraid that that might get into a little bit too much of that, licensing problem with like too much into the transformer territory, and
Right.
they don't want any trouble with that.
Right.
Oh yeah, certainly not. Well, I have actually not seen the book myself, but I am fascinated by it. I think I'm actually going to look for a copy after we have our conversation here.
Right.
But
Cool.
it sounds really interesting. Now, your experience with Voltron did not end with Devil's Due Publishing.
That's right.
Um, Somehow, and I would love to hear the story, you became involved in concept art for Voltron Force, the television series that premiered in 2011 on Nicktoons. So I would love to hear how you became involved and learn more about the work that you did for that.
I think the studio got my name from War Event Production because
Okay.
of my work on Transformer. I mean the Voltron comics.
Hmm.
So you know, as far as I know, War Event Production, they like what I did in the Voltron comics. So you know, so they suggest that I would you know suggest my name to the studio
Hmm.
to um to redesign Voltron basically.
Hmm.
Um, it was one of those things that I really enjoy doing, is that the studio allow me to do a lot of mechanical, like a lot of my idea of how I should differentiate different Voltron lions, because in the cartoon and in the comics, there's not a whole lot of difference between different lions besides the shape and and color. Uh, but with Voltron Force, I get to play around with the idea that each lion has different property to them, like water. Blue lion is water based,
Right.
red lions is fire based, and play around with their weapon system, play around with their um play around with their mechanic. And uh black lion, I gave him a lion man.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. It's a lot of fun for me to do. At the same time, I'm trying to shape in these robotic lion to look more like lions.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at the real lions, there's a difference between lions and tiger.
Oh yeah.
Right.
But with Voltron, with the old Voltron, you you can almost say they're a tiger, and nobody will bat an eye. So
I think that's a good argument. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm basically trying to bring the characteristic of lion into these robots, into these Voltron design, so they have more characteristic of lion rather than tigers. Uh, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun doing stuff like that. That dream up a brand new Voltron, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, I gotta be able to tie it back to the nostalgic, uh, factor where it needs to look like Voltron rather than a brand new robot.
Right. So we do have one of the ones that you shared on your Twitter account. This was something that you had not completed in the beginning, but in July of 2020, as a bucket list item, you completed it, and you said you actually did this for a friend of yours, right?
Yeah, for those of you that have seen the 2011 Voltron Force, it doesn't look
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Right.
Right.
It's completely redesigned because midway through the design phase, uh, I pretty much have all the lions uh, already designed and ready to combine them into Voltron. But um, I have no idea back in the day, but Mattel came in and say, "Hey, we can't do a toy like this. This is too expensive."
Mm-hmm.
So I have no idea that I need to work within a toy budget, although I should have. I mean, these days merchandising is important, but in my mind, when I'm designing a robot, I want it to be translated to be able to translate to a toy it, almost exactly without
Mm-hmm.
without making a lot of changes.
Mm-hmm.
Proportion wise, their mechanic wise, everything needs to translate correctly. I mean, if it's not 100%, it needs to be at least 90, 80% accurate. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the mindset when I try to design these characters for the animated series. But unfortunately, it is too expensive to build a toy like this. You know, so Mattel comes in, say, hey, we cannot do a toy like this.
Right.
We can't, it's too expensive. So we're gonna take over this project and we're gonna redesign it and put your name on it.
So
That's basically what happened. I mean, the
yeah,
studio hated it, the idea that they would uh, Mattel would take over the design project. Uh, the director, Stephen Gordon.
yes,
Yeah, some of you might remember his name
yep,
from
Yeah,
the
we actually
X,
interviewed
X
him a few years back.
yeah,
yep,
X-Men Revolution,
right.
Hmm.
X-Men Evolution. He was the director that was tied to the project at the time.
Hmm.
I think he told me afterwards that he quit because of it. So Mattel took over the project and they totally redesigned the lions and
Yes,
come back and tell me that, hey, you can finish the design. You know, you can use these lion and design the final assembly robot. So that's what I did. I mean, it wasn't my design. My name was attached to it.
right.
You know, from my perspective, I wasn't happy, but I'm still glad to have this opportunity to try my hands on totally reinvent an old cartoon that looks like it's made out of magic to into something a little more solid, more realistic.
Honestly, I love that image that you made there a couple years back from the evolution of that design you had done for Voltron Force. It's I dare say it may be my favorite uh, incarnation of the robot since the original anime. Um, it looks very realistic. It has all the major elements that are very identifiable with Voltron, and it just looks really really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is why, and people have been asking this to us as well. This is why at the end of the episodes, why you
Under
see
character
EJ's,
design. Yeah.
yeah, why you say EJ's name under character design at the end of the episode. And
Well,
funny
I
enough,
did.
it's right under John Delaney too, who we've also interviewed.
Yes.
I mean, I guess they credit me for the work that I put in, which
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
much appreciated. And I also eventually they did the studio also did have me design several other uh, several other robots in the show. I don't know if they will ever be made,
Hmm.
but you know, I did take part in multiple design of the characters.
Right.
Okay.
If you were to look for EJ's name on IMDb as a character designer for Voltron Force, you won't find it.
Well, IMDb
It's
is
not on
not known for
IMDb.
being very accurate,
Yes.
so
So
I
I'm
I
just
wouldn't put a lot of stock in the accuracy
right,
of that website.
right. So there you go.
I'm going to go ahead and share something very quickly. That's basically my entire screen here. I've got a selection of images that I found on the internet from your own artistry sites. And one thing that first of all, down here, this shows some of the work that you put into making these Voltron lion legs uh, realistic from a mechanical perspective and also inspired by organic lion animals. And it's just fascinating to see how much thought you put into these designs.
Yeah,
Um,
these are the design sketches that I did before I got into the comic,
Okay.
DDP Comics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I just love the way that the collapsed leg here, you know, that this when the leg is all folded up, it has that same general shape that you see in the anime, the sort of magically collapsed leg, and yet you've worked out how all the joints can work to make the lion leg look very realistic and have all the proper articulation. That to
I
me is just amazing.
I have to tell you, my cat does the same thing. My cat just sits down and it all the legs are completely gone and it's just a torso. I have no idea how the cat does that.
That's fascinating.
Now you know.
And here's some other stuff. So these are sketches of Voltron Force concepts. One thing that I find very interesting is that this appears to be your blue lion design here. And
Mhm.
the head, even though the body was largely redesigned for the television show, and for toys that ultimately were never made, ironically enough, um, the blue lion head and the green lion head here um, both look virtually identical to what's actually seen in the animated show. And I saw in the design that Mark had posted where you recently finished out your original design, the yellow lion has the scar over its left eye. Again, a feature that wound up in the television series. So elements of your concept designs did wind up in the show, just not in the form that you would have probably preferred. But it's still wonderful that they wound up there in some form. And one thing that I find really fascinating here is this image, unfortunately, is very low resolution, but this looks to me, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, this looks like the Mattel lion design, I think, with
Yeah,
maybe you conceptualizing how it would transform into Voltron's torso. Is that a correct assumption?
yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And
This
and
is this is after they did all the redesign on the lions, and then they
mhm,
bring it back to me to assemble them into the robot form.
okay. And I would argue that still you are thinking in a much more realistic mechanical perspective than the finished product wound up being on the show. I see you put a lot of care into reducing the magic on the front legs here in particular, where the shoulders split open and the legs collapse to at least give to shorten the legs in some way. Whereas in the final animated show, the front legs of the Black Lion wound up being fully extended and then magically inserting into the red and green lions to make the arms. So there was a lot of magic in the anime that I would say was even more magical than the original show, with how the Black Lion connected to the arms in particular. But I really love that you continued to put that thought into this, even though this was a deviation from your original design.
Well, things like this is, it's something that I love to do. Working out the magic to make it realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
it's just in my blood.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that again, even though this lion represents Mattel's iteration of the design, I do like that they at least preserved what you introduced in your, I would say, superior design, which is introducing the lion mane on the Black Lion. So you had introduced the mane, and I don't have an image of it right now, but although I think their design is not as interesting as yours visually, I do like that they at least carried the concept forward.
Yeah, they did kept a lot of concept ideas from the original design.
Yeah. And I just the more I see of your work with Voltron and outside of Voltron, the more just impressed I am with your thought process and your sheer talent. It's just amazing to me.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you a quick question about what types of tools are you using when you do most of your work? Is it like Clip Studio Paint, or is it something else that you're using when you're sketching out things? Like when you go to a con and you're doing maybe something for somebody that asks you to do something, what are you typically working on?
The traditional tool that I use when I'm inking, I use something called Micron.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with
I'm
it.
I'm not. Are you, Greg?
I am not. No,
No.
is it an actual physical pen, or are we talking
Yeah, yeah.
software?
It's a physical pen.
Okay.
Uh, I also use brush pen,
Hmm.
so I can vary the thickness of the line. That's on the side when I'm drawing on paper. When it comes to digital drawings, I nowadays I mostly use Clip Studio Paint.
Okay.
I also used to do a lot of Sketchbook Pro. That's where I did a lot of the lion design back in the day.
Okay.
I use Sketchbook Pro heavily back then, and Clip Studio wasn't even. I don't think it was even around back then.
Right.
But nowadays, I use Clip Studio for most things because it's very it's very versatile. You can have different brushes. You
Hmm.
can create brushes if you don't like them. You can you can paint like oil paint if you want to, watercolor if you want to. So it's very versatile. It basically replaced most of what I use.
So what would you say is different now? Like if you're doing the Ultraman series or something like that, versus what you did back when you were working on the DDP comics. What do you do differently now as a comic book artist?
I think it's mostly technique. I mean, I love trying out different techniques. So whenever I see something I like online, these days there are so many good artists online. When I
Hmm.
see something I like, I I, I would look at it and staring at it for hours and goes, I want to do something like that. How do I do something like that? How I want to try to do something like that. So I always trying something new, and in the recent in the recent years, I've been fallen in love with European. I don't know if there's a term for it, but European hatching technique
Oh,
Hmm.
or architecture. Like you would have uh, like lines after line to describe the contour, the shape of an object.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a term for it because I'm,
I,
but
I don't know.
I don't.
yeah, and I've fallen in love with it, and I'm incorporating some of those techniques into my work. So these days, you will see a lot of cross hatching or just simply hatching on my artwork. Back in the day, I don't do a whole lot of that. It's more open space, like line, open space, and lines,
Mm.
and sometimes like some drop shadow. That's mostly it. But these days, I'm incorporating a lot of cross hatching so I can create mint tone rather than just just going from uh, zero 0% black to 100% black. It
Mhm.
Hmm.
to solid black. It just whole different way of doing things. I mean, it just evolved over the years. Who knows? In a couple of years, I may be doing something completely different.
Wow.
And that's got to be exciting for you as an artist to
Yeah,
continue to stretch and grow.
but for for the same project, I try to stick with the same technique. Otherwise, it will be too jarring. Uh, if you look through my Transformer portfolio, you'll see some of the like one-shot books. The style is completely different from what I normally do.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate IDW. They allow me to do a lot of experiment.
Oh, good.
So, one book I may do things one way. Another book I will do something completely different.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to do is expand my own boundary, expand my creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And it, in a way, I think that might kind of hinder what people are looking for in my artwork too.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what to expect from me. Sometimes people email me, ask me to do a project. I often wonder what they want from me. So it may not be a good thing that what I'm doing is that, you don't always get the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's,
but
that's
if you don't do that, how do you allow yourself to grow unless you give yourself
Exactly.
those opportunities, right?
right.
Yeah. I mean, I love to grow myself into, whatever. I don't know what I'm growing into. And I like to try different things.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't want to stuck doing the same thing for 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
And I want to do um, all kinds of different things and all kinds of different technique. I want to try everything. Uh, I mean, life is so short. you know,
It is.
I don't want to stuck with the same thing over and over and over and over. It,
Yeah, you
That's
got to keep
awesome.
things fresh and interesting. So
yeah.
so speaking of fresh and newer things, if people who are interested in learning more about your more recent work wanted to find some of your more recent projects, where would you point them to?
Um, Recently, I've been doing a lot of work for Marvel, mostly covers, but I have been doing this regular thing with Marvel that they publish in their uh, what you call it, Marvel Unlimited app, where you
Okay,
have to sign up in order to read it. I
Right.
mean, you can,
okay,
yeah. Once you subscribe to it, you got tons of library of Marvel books you can read,
Right.
and Marvel has been doing uh, these series of comic called Marvel Infinity. It's
okay.
sort of like webtoon with Marvel characters.
Okay.
I've been doing a series of one of these web comics for Marvel regularly. I'm also working on a original graphic novel with Skybound Entertainment.
Okay.
And I've been working on that for a long, long time because they don't want to put it out unless they have a good volume to put out.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working on that for at least 2 years.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm on second volume of that book,
Wow.
and each volume is about 200 pages.
Wow.
So,
Well,
I still can't talk about it right now.
Right.
I can tell you what it is, but hopefully they will make the announcement soon.
Oh, good.
okay.
We'll be looking for that.
Absolutely. That sounds amazing that you've
Yeah.
put all this work into it and uh when it's finally announced and released, my goodness, what an amazing volume of work that's going to be.
I hope people will like it because is 2, 3 years in the making.
Wow. Well, we certainly wish you the best of success with that.
Well,
So
thank you.
so you've also been to some conventions, right?
Yeah,
In the past, you've been to places like E3, New York Comic Con, BotCon, but there's one coming up March 10th through the 12th of this year, TFCON LA 2023. That's Transformers Con, right?
that's correct.
And that's at the Marriott Burbank Airport. So you'll be there
Right.
from March 10th to 12th of this year.
Right. This is the second year that I'm attending. I normally don't go to convention too many times because in the past it's difficult to leave my work and go to convention.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But recently I've been trying to break myself out of the shell.
Mm-hmm.
I can't be just facing the wall all day and
Uh-huh.
every day. I'm just kind of trying to expand myself,
Good.
Yeah.
get out there and talk to people who want to talk to me.
Yeah, it must be really interesting to be able to get real-time feedback from someone through a face-to-face conversation. I know that when we do the podcast here, I mean, uh, our podcast is certainly not as popular as your comic book work, but at this point, but it's but we know the feeling of working in kind of a vacuum. You work on something, you send it out there, and if you get feedback, it's very delayed oftentimes.
Mhm.
So to be able to get that face-to-face direct feedback must be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm trying to get out of it. It's it's something I need to do because, well, basically, I'm a very shy person. It's hard for me to talk to people.
Mhm.
So it's a big step for me. I'm trying to hit the convention a little more these days. Just try to change myself. You know,
Yeah.
try a little something different.
And we are so glad you came out of your shell to join us on the podcast. This has been
Yeah.
such a fun time.
Yes. And we want to let you know that Greg and I are going to our own convention later this year.
Oh,
So
cool.
in October, do we have the official dates, Greg, for VoltCon?
I don't know the exact dates or if they've been announced just yet.
Um, so we've been invited back to VoltCon,
Oh, okay.
and it's a wonderful thing because this will be the fifth year of VoltCon.
Already.
So
Yeah,
it is a celebration of Voltron and giant robots and all that great stuff. So
right.
it's a
Cool.
lot of fun.
Where's that
So
located?
it takes place in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Hmm.
So it'll be at Indianapolis and it'll be at the Marriott West. So
Cool.
that'll be the one near the airport. And we have been invited back this year, and people can get tickets for it, and they can go to voltcon.org to get their tickets.
And we are certainly excited for the folks who will get to meet you at the convention that you'll be at in March at
Yeah.
TFCON 2023 LA.
Yep.
Cool. Cool. I'm excited.
Yeah.
So we really want to thank you for joining us here on Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me. I don't get invited too often.
And we'll see you all next time on
Let's Voltron.